Hello, hello to my True Blue crew. It is a beautiful Saturday, the first Saturday of November 2023. I can't believe we're starting our 11th month of the year. Time just flies, but we are going to sit back and sew a little bit here and just have a great day. So if you are catching the replay, I hope you have had a wonderful weekend and that the year is progressing nicely for you. So drop a note in the chat and let me know where you are joining from and what quilt project you are working on. Today is the International Scrap Sorting Day as declared by the Modern Quilt Guild here in the United States. And I got a head start and I have my piles of fabric sorted. I needed to tidy up my sewing space a little bit. So I worked on that earlier in the week. But today I want to work on the November block of the month for the Little Bit Different block of the month program that I have been designing and sharing all year. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat so you can find the pattern. And I don't have a sample block available. I already sewed it into a quilt. So I'm going to make another demo block so you can see that. I'm calling it Flock because November, we're getting ready in the United States for that big Thanksgiving feast. Birds are on my mind. And you see, depending on the area of the country you live in, you start seeing those migrations. And so I adapted the flying geese block to work with the rectangular units that I'm experimenting with this year as part of the Little Bit Different collection. And so I'm just going to get started. They aren't traditional flying geese. They're more like a triangle in a square, the Tri-Rex kind of design, but I haven't ever used that ruler. So I'm just prepping my rectangles. I've already cut them into uphill and downhill units. So I'm just going to get started sewing that. And as I said, if you are interested in the pattern, that's on my website, linked in the description below. And we'll adjust this a little bit so that you can see what is going on. And throughout the Little Bit Different block of the month program, I have used HRTs, half rectangle triangle units. And so if you've joined me before, this will be a familiar exercise. So whenever you trim HRT fabrics, you want them all right sides up. I use a lot of batiks. So I've got my light and darks there, and I'm just going to get those turned around so that I have all the lights on one side and the darks on the other so that we can sew those together. And when you sew half rectangle triangles, you're going to sew on that long diagonal edge. So I prep all my piles here. I like to lay out my blocks next to my sewing machine. And we are just about ready. So then I take my light and my dark, my background and my print, and I'm just going to fold those right sides together. And we want to sew on that long edge. And so with half rectangle triangles, you always look for these two mountain peaks when you are sewing. With batiks, it would be a little bit easier to put your triangles together and sew that. But when you open that up, it's not a rectangular unit, it's a kite. So we want to make sure we get those lined up and sew with mountain peaks. So let me know your scrap organization system. For this International Scrap Sorting Day. I sort all my fabrics by color, generally. You know, there's always those exceptions when you have your uh, work in progress area, and so you have all the fabric that has been designated for projects in one space. And then once it gets used, that's when it goes into my scrap bin by color. So I don't necessarily need a scrap sorting day. I need a general declutter time period so that I can get those various bags and bundles of projects put away. So I'm just chain piecing my half rectangle triangles. And this block has 3 flying geese type units in it. So that means you end up with extra half rectangle triangles. So I'll have to figure out a scrappy project to do with all my leftover units. Yes, Levon, I bounce around so much, it's very hard for me to say I always do something because it's, you know, if it works in the moment, that's about all I can ask for. And when I first started quilting, I followed Bonnie Hunter online. She's a wonderful quilter and she does a lot of really scrappy quilts that are a lot of fun with classic block designs and things. So as I was following her and participating in some of her sew-alongs, she talked about sorting by size because then she could just grab the size of piece that she needed, and she had specific pieces that all typically work together to make her classic quilt blocks. You know, we know that 2.5-inch strips are very useful, and then you may have 2.5-inch squares, 2x4, so 2.5 by 4.5-inch units. And so she would pre-cut all her scraps and then sort them by size. I don't follow that kind of sizing formula as much, so it became more useful for me to just keep my color bins organized that way. Although I do have a 2.5-inch strip bucket, and that's, you know, what I pull from when I want to work with strips. And at one point, I did dump out the whole bucket and sorted the strips by color within the overall 2.5-inch strip bucket. So that made it useful when I wanted to pull specific colors, because I am not a kitchen sink type scrappy quilter that just throws all sorts of random colors together. I've tried quilting that way and I just don't like the results as much. So I tend to do very scrappy within a color family. Like my banner here is shades of blue. So I pulled all my blue scraps to work in that way. And so I may make a I'm looking at my design wall. I have some star blocks there that I've done in a purple and teal colorway. So each individual block is different fabrics. So the whole quilt is scrappy because every block has different combinations of fabrics. But I stuck with those very limited color selections, rather than having a purple star and a blue star and a yellow star and an orange star and a green star. I just made teal stars. So your mileage may vary. That's the beautiful thing about quilting. That's what makes the variety that's so wonderful in our quilting world. And let me start with my next set of triangles. So I'm making uphill triangles and downhill triangles, and when I put them together, they're going to make an overall bigger triangle. And I have had so much fun with this Little Bit Different pattern collection because not only did I do 12 different blocks so that it would be a block of the month for the year, I did a different quilt layout for each block so that if you don't want the sampler effect at the end of the year, you can have a devoted quilt for each of the blocks. So and I am planning a special bundle for Black Friday weekend. So be on the lookout for that. You'll want to sign up for my newsletter on truebluequilts.com so that you can take advantage of those Black Friday specials. Real-time sewing here. We don't have the magic of editing to speed up this process. So thanks for hanging with me. And as part of my scrap sorting, I found a bunch of half square triangles. Some of these have fusing on the back. I don't remember what I was doing that needed fusible, but luckily that just rips off. And so with these half square triangles, the bonus triangles that you trim off, they make great leader enders for when I'm chain piecing in between, and then I can use these up, and I've got other scrappy blocks to use. And I want to say hi to Mary. She's in Oklahoma joining us. Okay, so I have my chain of HRTs, and I've got my Blade Saver trimming tool. It recycles your rotary cutting blades into this great little chain piecing tool. Let me adjust the camera just a bit, and you can see it there in the corner. And all you do is press your chain of units across that blade, and it cuts them apart. And I know some people do a webbing technique when they're quilting and just continue to sew the pieces together when they're in a chain. I've never gotten the hang of that. So I like to just press everything or clip everything and do it that way. Okay, so I've got my half rectangle unit. You can see I've got a pretty batik there. This is a neutral that's just got some very subtle swirls on it that are in kind of a tan shade, and so it works really nicely. I wanted some fall colors, so I thought a neutral cream and a brown tone. And Liz is here from Australia. I love when we have our international friends join us. Thank you so much for tuning in. So I'm just finger pressing, and when I sew half rectangle triangles, I always press my seams open because I don't want bulk at the corners, especially, you know, because the angle here is so sharp on a rectangle that the whole block is going to lay nicely if seams are pressed open. So as I said, you need 3 uphills and 3 downhills. So I set my extras off to the side, and that's another, get angled better so that I am not twisting my back. Like I said, with the half square triangle, bonus triangles that I sew together as leader enders with these bonus HRT units, I just keep those off to the side. And someday, that elusive someday, when we're all super productive, churning out scrappy quilts, I will have these units that I play with in new, fun, scrappy ways. So after I get these blocks sewn together, we will work on some scrap projects, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with bonus triangles. Here is my other colorway. I'm using the same creamy background, but I've found this pumpkin print. And I usually don't use these kind of fall colors, muted browns very often, but they really are quite lovely. That's a bonus. As I said, I'm making 2 different blocks. Our guild has a block exchange, so I will have a couple selections for them. And one of these days, I'm going to have to go back and actually sew the samples for all these quilts that I've been designing this year. That saying that you shop faster than you sew, and that's why you end up with a huge fabric stash. I'm that way with my designs. I can whip up a quilt design pretty fast, and I don't have time to sew it all together. Okay, so I've got my HRTs, and now I need to trim them down because all of our rectangles are 2.5 by 3.5. So I've got my background squares, and I grab my Little Bit Different ruler. I never expected to be one of these design people that comes out with new tools and specialty rulers. And certainly you can make do trimming with whatever ruler you have. But this ruler is specially marked with that 2.5 by 3.5 half rectangle triangle. So that diagonal line is exactly where you need to lay it on your seam. So, and it's a kind of day glow color on the ruler, and so it stands out really nice, and you can get things lined up and trimmed very quickly. And as I said, I was using a regular ruler and finding that 2.5 by 3.5. You can put tape on your rulers to help guide your trimming. But when I planned to do this quilt for an entire year, I think it was March or April by the time I planned this ruler out and had it manufactured, I was realizing I could save a lot of time if I had a ruler that trimmed to the exact size I need. And so this is a 6.5 by 9.5, which is the size of our Little Bit Different blocks. So if you plan to make several of the blocks, then you may find this ruler handy, and you can purchase that at truebluequilts.com, and I will get it sent out to you right away. Trimming always takes longer than I want it to. And the thing about working with half rectangle triangles is that you can't use the same triangle markings for every rectangle size that you want to use. So this one is only going to work, these markings will only work with multiples of 2 by 3. So a 2 by 3, a 4 by 6, a 6 by 9, those all have the same ratio. So I can use this ruler for those specific sizes. If you wanted to make a 3 by 5 rectangle in your block, you would have to use a different ruler, because that little angle is going to be different on a 3 by 5 rectangle than it is on a 2 by 3 rectangle. One of the lovely realities of math. So the Little Bit Different ruler works for 2 by 3 finished units. My friends at Off the Wall Quilt, who manufacture the rulers for me, have a whole set of half rectangle triangle templates. It's called the Angle Play design. And they've got 20 some different sizes of rectangles that they've done the math to get those angles correct. And they've manufactured triangle templates. So it's not a square rectangular ruler like this one. It's actually just an individual triangle in those different sizes. So if you enjoy half rectangle triangles, check out Angle Play. And since I'm on the topic of half rectangle triangles, Latifa Safir is a modern quilter, and she came out with half rectangle triangle rulers also. And she's got longer rulers. So they're more like this concept, but more like the 6x24 type rulers. But the markings are for specific ratios. She's got a like a 1x2, I guess, or a which would then go to 2x4, 4x8, 6x12, that kind of stuff. And she's got a second one, but hers are called the Herty, HRTY. Vicky is asking because she just started working on the Little Bit Different blocks. Yes, I have a sampler layout that I will reveal with the December block, so coming up next month. But all of the patterns that I've released throughout the year for the Little Bit Different collection, there is a version that has 12 blocks in each of those quilts. So you could put all 12 of the Little Bit Different blocks together in any of the Little Bit Different quilts. So I'm planning a big reveal video for those. So you'll have to wait just a few more weeks for that, because that will be coming out in December. So you can see what those scrappy quilts will look like. And I'm thrilled that you have been enjoying the patterns and have been sewing along. Trying to catch up on comments. Liz is joining us from Australia and her phone's running out of charge. So yes, that's the beauty of YouTube, Liz, is that the replay will be available. You can drop in, just leave the video running whenever you have time to catch up with us. I'm just working on trimming my half rectangle triangle units. And as I say on every sew and chat, I'm tucked away in my little corner and I can't get to my iron. So plus I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and it gets very warm in the house, especially if you have an iron going. I need to get one of the Aliso irons, because that's why they designed it to lift up from the bottom, so they didn't have that hot air blowing out into the room all the time, which I thought was pretty ingenious. So we need our 6, this month's block, the flock block. Flocks of tall geese is what I named the whole thing, is a 9-patch layout. So you need 6 of these HRT, 3 in each direction, and then 3 background blocks units to make the whole quilt. One of the other features of the Little Bit Different ruler is that it's coated with a non-slip, grippy kind of surface called Easy Grip, and it makes it really nice. So if you've seen me as I'm not that great at cutting sitting down. As I pick that up, you see how it kind of peels away from the ruler. That's because it's got that wonderful non-slip, kind of sticky surface, so that your fabric is not going to shift while you cut. It helps make those nice. So there you see the fabric is stuck to the ruler. Peel it away. And I've used this quite a bit over the last few months. So I just need to rinse it off with some warm water, and that will get some of the threads, fabric residue off of it, and we'll be good to go. Vicky is asking, do I do a block of the month every year? No, I don't. It came together at kind of the last minute last fall, so I was ready for 2023. But I do have, we'll see. I don't have anything in the works for a 2024 block of the month. But there's still a few weeks left in 2023 for me to plan something and get started. I was thinking more of a quarterly quilt along so that we would work on 4 specific quilts throughout the year. But we'll see. And I'm remembering some ideas that I had with friends of mine. So we'll see. Okay. I have my half rectangle triangles trimmed. I have my pile of background units, and I can use my little felt board to lay out the block. So I'm going to put 2 different triangles together to make a bigger triangle, and I'm going to put a plain rectangle on one side. I've put it to this side. Then I'm going to make another triangle, but I'm going to keep it offset, and then I'm going to fill in the opposite side with my plain fabric, and then I will come back. And I always manage to drop something so you guys get to see all my lovely gray hairs there. And then I come back and I repeat that top row. So you can see the layout there of the 9 patch. And that is a flock of flying geese flying off the edge of your quilt. So that is what I have planned for this block. And let me transfer it to my countertop and get that felt board out of the way. And then we can just sew our units together. This is where that webbing technique would come into play if you were sewing all your block sections together, chain piecing things. And if you are having difficulty with getting your pieces under your needle, if they, for sometimes I find that my machine doesn't like to start on a half square triangle or half rectangle triangle where the angle is. It likes just that, plain 2 layers of fabric, not that extra layer from your your angled pieces. So just flip your fabric around and sew from the other end, and it may get started a little better. So like this, I'm putting my fabrics right side together, and so I have 4 layers of fabric because it needs to go over that angle edge. So if I flip my unit over and sew from the plain edge, my machine handles that a little bit better. It's like the feed dogs get confused when there's too much fabric there for them to worry about. And since I am chain piecing, I can find the break between my blocks. And then I can come back and add the third piece to my row. So you do have to remember with this block that the plain rectangle will alternate. Sometimes it'll be on the right-hand side of your block, of your row, and other times it'll be on the left-hand side of your row to get those bird sections to alternate. And I don't always remember to use my thread cutter. Sometimes I just grab my scissors there to get those units apart. Okay, so here's a thought for next year is, in addition to doing these sew and chats on YouTube, which is one way, I'm talking to you guys, I can see your comments, but it's not as interactive. What would you guys think about a Zoom call? If anybody would show up to that, I can certainly open a Zoom session and we then would all be able to sew together and I could see your projects, because that's the fun part for me, is the show and tell. I'm showing off all my fun fabrics, but I love to see what other people are working on as well. So you can find my email in the video description if that sounds like fun. If you join in, go ahead and drop me a note or in the chat there. And Nan is back from Sweden, my European friend. Hi, Nan. Hope you're doing well. Yes, Vicky, a stiletto would be very useful. I have a little tool there that I could use to help guide those triangle corners under my feed dogs. I just have never gotten that used to working with a stiletto. It always feels like I'm an octopus with my hands going down different ways. So I just kind of fumble around and make it work. Nan's been working a lot. So yeah, I know how that goes. Some days it feels like I'm juggling 5 different full-time jobs. The other thing I notice, sometimes I'm looking at my stitching line and it veers off ever so slightly. So you need to remember when you're piecing to make sure you guide your fabric all the way straight under the needle and off the fabric. So with our rows, I'm going to press my triangle seam open just so that I can reduce a little bit of the bulk at that top corner. And then it really doesn't matter with the plain fabric. If you want to go ahead and press to that plain fabric, you can. I typically do that just because the block will lay nice and flat since there's no extra seam there. And you're alternating your rows so that seam will nest. It won't be doubling up on anything. And whenever I am joining rows and need to match those seams, that's when I get out my pins. And one of the tricks to make sure you always hit your 1/4 inch seam is when you're looking at that back, you want to sew right over the tip of that triangle. That will make sure that you do not cut off your point. The point is visible on the back side of your row. So keep that in mind. And I need to make sure my rows are in order to stagger those geese. And we'll line that up. So when you are working with seams that are pressed open, they don't always nest. Obviously, there's no wall, there's no firm seam there on the other side of your block to make sure that gets lined up. So you just have to be really careful as you pin and check both sides of your fabric to make sure your pin is right along that seam line. And then you'll be ready to join your rows. And I do a lot of lifting my fabrics around to make sure that I've got those seams laying in the direction that I want them to. The direction I want them to go. And then we will repeat the process, the finger pressing with my other colorway. So there's the other row. I was just looking into the comments and Vicky was saying that she is not good at keeping up with block of the month. Yeah, I get pretty distracted with quilt projects. So the Little Bit Different has been good because I planned out all 12 of the blocks and then it was just, making the samples and writing the instructions throughout the year for everyone. So it's good in that respect that it gave me something to talk about, and I was, it helps to have a plan for the year. So I need to figure out what my design schedule is going to look like for next year. I think I want to slow down a little bit. That's why I was thinking about just one quilt every quarter. That would give us 3 months to work on something, and then we could shift our focus. Right, so then I have my pumpkins. And I can see that it wasn't lining up exactly as I pinned. So we can just readjust there. There we go. This is the season for craft festivals. There's all sorts of craft events going on the weekends now that here in my area, the weather is cooled off. It's nice to be outside. But you typically don't, I mean, you may find quilters, but they're not going to craft festivals unless it's a quilt show, to find quilt items. So I've never really, I've had the occasional wild thought of, oh, I should make a bunch of, bowl cozies or coasters, or because the few times I've tried to take my full-size quilts, there's not a market for finished quilts at a craft fair. They're looking for those little $5 and $6 items, not the $500 finished quilt. Okay. There is our flock of tall geese finished block. So it finished as a 9-patch, so there were just the 3 rows to sew together. And you can see how you could put those, get them flying all different ways across your quilt. So that is the November Little Bit Different block of the month. And so now I can come back to my bonus triangles. The scrappy project, like I said, there was some fusible on here. I guess it wouldn't make that much difference if I just left it in there. That will get. And here is the flock of tall geese in the other batik brown gold colorway. So those will be some nice fall blocks for my guild exchange. Yeah, Vicky, I hope you are able to get those blocks together and have fun with that. Yeah, you'd have to sell a lot of the cheap items at a craft fair to make up your booth cost. So the few times I've done it and not made very much money, I just tell myself that was my craft retreat weekend, and then I don't feel quite as bad at not making money. But okay, so bonus triangles. I just sewed my half square triangles together. I'm going to live dangerously here, folks. I'm not going to trim these. I'm just going to sew them together. And I'm trying to think what I was sewing that I was like using this color of fabric. Maybe it was a friend of mine knows I collect half trimmed bonus triangles. But that's weird that because these are fabrics that I've worked with recently. This nice yellow print and a blue batik. But all the blues have this little square of fusible on them. And I don't do applique, so I don't know where I would have found triangles with fusible on them. So it's a mystery. I am just pairing my triangles together. To make pinwheel blocks. And as I was sorting my scraps, I came across these half rectangle triangles that had already been cut. And look at those pretty greens. So I'm just going to sew these together. Maybe I can use them in a border somewhere. So I will. Look for those mountain peaks as I match those triangles together. So we were talking about scrap sorting day. I have a bag of half square triangle units that I collect at the my guild open sewing day. Everybody gives me their leftover trim triangles, and I just sew pinwheel blocks of all sorts of colors. I've got this wild half square triangle. So these are all, sometimes I will switch and make hourglass blocks. So this, I think originally, well, here's another collection of bonus trim triangles. This used to be the unsewn fabric box. Oh my gosh, I've got binding strips in there. Here's another stack of trimmed triangles so that I could just grab from this basket for my leader ender project. But as you can see, I don't sew my leader enders often enough. And so I've got this huge overflowing basket of triangles. And then I've got another basket that has all the finished hourglass and pinwheel blocks. So I need to start sewing those together into some kind of scrappy quilt. So that's kind of what I'd like to do on these live and potential Zoom sessions. Vicki, yes. If I did a Zoom session, the people that signed up would get the replay of the Zoom session. Yes, those baskets turn into boxes and boxes of leftover units and pieces. So that's probably what I will focus on in 2024 is the use these first Saturday sew and chats as UFO conquering sessions. So um, that's a thought at the moment. But we were chatting a while back because I typically, like today, I was able to make 2 blocks. This isn't enough for a quilt. 3 blocks don't make a quilt, but they do make a table runner. So you could add a little bit to a single block and make it a placemat, donate to Meals on Wheels, save them for some other, eclectic, scrappy, wild quilt. Um, but just have fun with it. That is always the goal. So I like to do these live sessions for a couple of hours. So we're at the halfway point. If anybody needs to step away and get some water or refreshment or check in with the family. I am just going to keep sewing my units together. As I said, I had that small stack of bonus rectangles, and I was using my triangles here to make more pinwheel blocks. So I can do that pretty quickly and easily. There's just some dog ears here that I need to trim off. So we can do that easily. And I just sewed that pinwheel together without pinning to nest the seams. I hope it turns out okay. I drop so much. So there is my green. Now the fun thing, let me see if I can show a couple different options for half rectangle triangles. Get my board. So I have my nice green blocks, and you could put them together to make a spiky border. Like I was, you would have to cut the opposite way to make uh, triangles, but you could rotate if they're the same direction. You can rotate one and it makes that nice fan blade. So you could work with something like that. If you wanted to do some kind of pinwheel design, you would have to get an alternating fabric to fill in there, because obviously your rectangles aren't going to line up and make a pinwheel the same way that a half square triangle does. So when I'm working with half rectangles, a lot of times I'll work in quadrants, because if I made 4 blocks with the half rectangle triangles on the corner like this and some other fabric filling in this space, then I could rotate that quadrant around to get a pinwheel type block. So I have a lot of fun with half rectangle triangles. So we'll play with that. And there is a nice cherry pinwheel. And this next fabric, like I said, I don't know. I remember using this fabric, but oh, okay, I know what it was. So these were left over when I put corners on applique blocks. And so the person that did the applique had the fusible on there. So now that mystery is solved. I know you were all on the edge of your seats, but so do I want to do hourglass blocks? No, I'll do polka dot, or I'll do a pinwheel with this polka dot fabric. That will be fun. My machine was eating my triangle tip. I do not have my single stitch throat plate. I was sewing at one point where I needed to do a zigzag, and so I had my other, I need to put this throat plate back on, because right there where the needle goes in, it's just a single hole. So the needle can only go in one position. I've got the throat plate now has a wider space so that the needle can zigzag. I don't zigzag very often, so I need to put that plate back on because it works better for triangle tips of fabric. They don't get sucked down into that hole as much when it's 3. Oh no. How in the world did I? Oh no, there's 4 there. I was thinking I only had 3 triangles to put together with polka dots, and that wouldn't make a pinwheel with just 3 corners. And I've got this. Okay. I am hearing the phone in the other room, so excuse me for 1 second. Be right back. My phone was in the other room and I blockade myself here. But it was just a random text message about open enrollment for. So I'm sure you've seen all the commercials about Medicare enrollment, and it's that insurance time of year. So I'll get these half square triangles together. And I'm imagining a fun quilt with a bunch of different sizes of pinwheels. That would be a fun charity quilt, especially for like Project Linus or something that supports children. They would have fun with some brightly colored pinwheel blocks in a variety of sizes. So let's see, how do I want this pinwheel to rotate there? Oh yeah, I'm just gonna trim off my dog ears. It's ready to go. Together. End of October, early November is always Houston International Quilt Festival time frame. So if you are thinking of attending one of those big shows, that's always a fun one. I was able to go to market one year when my mom had a fabric shop and she decided to go, and that's an incredible place, that convention center filled with all those wonderful quilts and vendors. We had so much fun looking at all the new stuff way back in the day. I don't think this yellow and tan would make a very good combination of fabrics for a pinwheel. So we will combine those with something else. And the machine is making a weird sound. Time for some service. So there is our fun polka dot pinwheel. Vicky said placemats and pot holders when you've just got a single or double, those orphan blocks. Yes, pot holders tend to get grungy and need to be replaced sooner rather than later. I agree. So 1, 2, 3. And pot holders would be a great gift if you've got kids out on their own for the first time. My daughter doesn't cook much beyond the microwave because she's afraid of getting burned, I guess. So I apologize to her for instilling a fear by, doing something and allowing her to have a minor burn experience as a kid. But I've also told her that she would probably need to learn to deal with taking things in and out of the oven at some point if she expects to be independent and not spend a ton of money on takeout all the time. Okay, so let's see. What else can we do? I've got a lot of yellows and yellow, blue, red, and gray. I was doing a kind of a this is like barely 1.5 inches. I don't think I'm going to save those small bits, but I've got when I have smaller units like this, if you sew along the diagonal, it makes a smaller square than if you sew on the vertical and make hourglass units. So sometimes I try that, but these are pretty small. So I may just put these in the scrap bag for I'm still trying to find to see if the local fiber, there's a company that makes like mattress stuffing, that kind of thing, to see if they'll take my fabric scraps. Just because I would like to be a little bit healthier for the planet than sending all of this to the landfill. And if they can recycle it into a usable material, that would be great. And like I said, at some point I thought that little 1-inch triangles would be fun and useful, and now I'm regretting that choice. I've got a ton of these little hourglass units, so I can work on some bonus blocks with pinwheels and hourglass units. Trimming off the dog ears before I sew my half square triangles together. So on these, I sewed the straight side instead of the diagonal, so that it opens up like that, and I can make a little hourglass. Hourglass or quarter square triangle block. that one got all messed up. This is one that I should have trimmed the blocks even because I've got a pretty jagged edge there. Yeah, Vicki is saying that her group makes pet beds. And I've heard different things. At some point I heard that just putting, your lumpy scraps into a pet bed and donating it to a shelter, if they try to wash it, it shifts too much and gets all lumpy and they didn't want it. So I don't know if there's a different way to, sew it together, kind of like if you used, what am I trying to think? If you used netting and you quilted over the netting and it would then just became like a thin new piece of fabric, that might work. But I'm just rambling. I haven't ever worked with a group that makes pet beds, so I don't know. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'm sewing these small scraps together anyway because they're here and I'm sitting at the sewing machine, so why not? My mom got me into quilting, and she has been making a dedicated effort to sew from her scrap bins for a couple years now. That's how big a stash she has. And she'll send me the pictures when she gets something finished. And she just makes the most gorgeous random patterns. If she has a collection of pinwheels, she'll put the pinwheels together and do kind of a piano key border around the outside. So I need to work on that as well. It's my stupid day job that gets in the way of all these fun quilts that I want to make. So we have a yellow hourglass. We've got another yellow pinwheel. I'm reading Vicky's comments about making the pet shelter quilts. Yeah, that would be a good kind of group charity effort to work with a specific shelter so that the exact dimensions of projects they need. Like you said, cage liners, cage covers. That would be a great way to use up the scraps, making sure there's no glue or metal in the fabrics. And here's a nice, I love visiting my boutique scraps. I've got a long arm project to work on this afternoon, so that's going to be the next effort there, is to load that. October was a really busy long arm month for me. I had several big projects that I was pushing to get done. And so I really just kind of spent this last week taking a break from that long arm work. So I have some strips, 1 inch, 1.5 inch strips tucked in with my half square triangle bits. I have a separate basket that I keep these narrow strips in because my guild really enjoys making the stitch and flip scrappy blocks. And so having a selection of thin strips already cut is a good effort there. I'm really debating on these triangles. They're so tiny. Those are long. So see here, we're doing some scrap sorting like the Modern Quilt Guild suggested. These are a little bit bigger, so I will see if I can get a couple of those paired together. And then, you know what? They're always making more fabric. Don't feel bad if you're throwing your scraps away. This is a little bit different shade of red, so I will sew those together. Okay, I'm not enjoying this baggie of scraps as much as I thought I would, so I will set that aside. What else? I didn't have more of those. Let's see what's in this bag of scraps. So this is what happens when you get a scrap project going. You just kind of pick and choose and sew bits together. And if you need a little more conversation while you quilt, I recommend the Quilting on the Side podcast. A friend and I have gotten together and we interview other quilters and talk about some of the business aspects of quilting. So I will set those units off to the side, and you can check out at QS Podcast is our podcast channel. Hello, Jay Murphy. 4.5 inch butterfly blocks. Ooh, sounds gorgeous. So the blocks finish at 4.5 inches. That is pretty small. Working with 4.5 inch squares isn't too bad. Yes, and I understand futzy is a great term for those fussy, intricate little blocks that you have to pay attention to, all those tiny, tiny pieces and tiny seams. So as I said, I got frustrated with my 1.5 inch scraps, so I'm going to a larger size selection here. And then you get into the dilemma of, well, I could do 2 and 2. I didn't have enough of the same shade. Well, that one's red anyway, so it doesn't match. To make a pinwheel, and like if you have 3 orange triangles and then one that's yellow, obviously in a scrappy quilt, it's not going to make that much difference. Sometimes it's kind of fun to see that one oddball block, but I tend to be a little more symmetrical and do 2 and 2, or if I have a lot of orphans, I'll mix them up so that all 4 colors are different with the same background and separate my scrappiness that way. Okay, so I have another bold orange pinwheel. I've got a lot of these yellow and oranges. Those will be fun to put together in a project. And there's, oh. And here's another one of my little hourglass blocks. 2 different yellows there with the same gray background. The other thing about half square triangles is I could leave them all just individual blocks and put them together in some different star kind of block arrangements, rather than just pinwheels all the time. So decisions. There is a virtual event next weekend. Has anyone heard of Quilt Fusion? It sounds really interesting. There's like 12, 15 different instructors that are giving hour-long classes next weekend, Friday and Saturday, I think. I'm very tempted to sign up, but I have other work I need to be doing. I can't just take the weekend off for myself. Have a good week, Vicki. Thanks for being here. No, I thought I was going to have a leftover orange, but there's other ones in there. The other thing I could do is just trim this and make smaller. We'll see. We shall see. Try and get a few more of these little bits. Sewn together. Was debating on pinwheels or hourglass blocks, so I'm going to switch it up since I would have a multicolor pinwheel. Decided to just do the hourglass version. So I've got another of my little hourglass. I've got too much fabric floating around here. It's starting to fly everywhere. And then this other rosy red hourglass. Oh, I did. This thread matched my fabric, and I thought I hadn't sewn these together. I remembered sewing them together. I've not decided which. So I've got 2 shades of orange and this 1 shade of purple. That's not enough variety to do like one of each, but we'll see. I'm just playing around with no plan here in this bag of trimmed half square triangles. So I will throw in those other scraps. Just because I like to stay a little bit organized with these different units. That'll make it easier to put a quilt together in the future if I have, you know, all half square triangles. If I have another bag that has all my half rectangle triangle scraps, I can play with those. Like I said, these I think I saved, they were just a little too small. So I need to decide what I am doing with those, if I want to save that for a donation for the pet bed project or something like that. But talking about scrap organization, I have a recent video where I share a couple different storage options that, you know, Ziploc bags. These were recycled from patterns or accessories or something that I bought. Little sandwich bags tuck in to another project bag, so you have a place to store your scraps. As I said, I have another bag going for strips. And then for my larger scraps, I sort them by color, and those are all in bigger plastic bins so that they can stack in the corner of my sewing room. And that helps me keep my scraps organized. I have a lot of different tote bags that I will put projects in as I'm working on, so that I can keep all the fabric, the pattern, rulers, notions, thread, all that kind of stuff will stay together for those projects as I'm working on. So I'm not, you know, sometimes I feel like the mad scientist throwing things all around the sewing room as I'm working on projects and get interrupted and set them aside to work on something else. But I just want to remind everybody that we are making, for the Little Bit Different block of the month, we are making these flocks of tall geese, and they are made with half rectangle triangles. So you get 2 triangles out of a rectangle, and then you need a second set. So you will have your 3 that you pair up for the block, and then you'll have a bonus to use in another project, unless you plan to make an even number of blocks out of the same fabric, and then you will have the math works out. My words are not following my thoughts. You will have an even number of blocks to put together, and then you can use an even number of your triangles there, because, you know, a rectangle of dark fabric will make 2 triangles, and you need 3 in the block. So have fun. Send me emails, post online, and tag me if you make the Little Bit Different block of the month. That is always a fun opportunity to share. And oh, I know what it is. I was going to try digging up random projects here, since I got bored with my half square triangles pretty fast. So I will set those aside. But I have an English paper piecing hexie project, and I was hand stitching these not very well. The individual hexagons were turning out, but as I put them together, it's looking kind of awkward. So I am going to try stitching by machine, because my friend assures me, who's a EPP expert, assures me that you can do this by machine. I will give it a try and see how that works. Okay, that's sewed down a little bit flatter, so I need to, I'm doing this really intricate snowflake pattern. And you can kind of see it there. These are all, and the way the pattern's written, they were sewn in vertical rows. I did a whole video at the beginning of the year on my failed EPP project. And then as I'm looking at this, my stitches are horrible. So you can kind of see them poking in there in the seams, and it's looking ridiculous. But I really like the pattern. I want it to work. So let me know what your English paper piecing tips would be for me here. I think if I should keep, I don't know if I should keep making the florets and trying to join them later, or if I should just, build off of this section that I already have done. I just don't know what the best way to approach this project from this point would be. Because I was trying to keep track when I made florets. I was trying to color in and see how I got things done. But it's kind of hard to keep track. That's why I was thinking it might be easier just to build off of the center and just follow the pattern up a row and get that together. But it looks like I messed up already. I thought I had these florets together in the right order, and I did not. So I'm going to it's mind-boggling trying to translate these little hexagons and what I have in actual fabric and try to make sense of it. Okay, so I've got one there and then two. Okay, so that one looks right. Like I said, my hand stitching is not the best. So that's why I wanted to try it by machine. It just seems like it's going to be so tedious at the machine to do, you know, one little 3/4 inch segment at a time. But I suppose if it gets the project done, then that is a much better. This one looks like it would go. Riveting television, I'm sure, as I'm studying my EPP project and trying to figure out how I will put that together. But I think okay, so I have a plan, and that will work. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of other projects to show you. Although I can show you all the 2.5 inch strip blocks that I made for my Sew a Jelly Roll Day back in September. And here's another view of the t-shirt that says 3 blocks won't make a quilt, but they will make a table runner. So if you ever peter out on a project and get tired of making blocks, remember you can always scale your projects down. So these blocks are called jelly stars. They're all made with 2.5 inch strips. I use the easy angle ruler to cut my half square triangles right from the pre-cut strips. You don't have to make them oversized. And I just dug into my scrap bin and pulled. I tried to stay with teal for the stars and purple for these sashing rectangles, yellow accents, and just a gray kind of neutral background. This one actually has a white background because I needed some variety there in a light background, kind of that white gray. Here's a gray background, really scrappy rectangles. They're in purple. This one is a very washed out light block. And then this background actually merges into more of a tan. So I really kept it fun and scrappy. And that one also is a creamy white, a very low volume block because that teal fabric is on it's a very open print. Another one. And I have I'm working on a pattern for this, so look for that coming soon. But you can get the block layout and just bare bones instructions. So if you're able to piece things together from pictures, you can find that download at truebluequilts.com for jelly roll ideas. And there's a darker block, a lighter one with some gray background. Here I'm using that same swirly batik. I don't know if it's going to come up on camera, that I was using today. Just love that background. Here's another one with that brown background. So like I said, started off with a lot of gray, and then I morphed into this creamy background. And then this one got even a little more brown in the background. So then I threw in these two, a lighter tan and a darker, almost brown background, because if you have one odd block, it's going to stand out. But if you throw in those kind of color choices one or two more times, then it blends into the scrappiness. And there is the final. This is another very light colored block, but there is some teal in that block when you're seeing it in person. So I think I'm going to put those together with yellow sashing between all the blocks, and then I'll have to decide on an outer border. But that is coming together really nicely. I was able to make 20 blocks just from my 2.5-inch strip bin. So that was a fun, scrappy project this fall. Sew a Jelly Roll Day is in September each year, so we will continue to celebrate that. And I encourage you to dig into your scrap bins and just put some random blocks together. I was working on some pinwheels with my leftover scraps. So these are great, just kind of filler blocks. If you need to get that little bit of sewing in to bring some joy to your day, then keep a basket of half square triangles handy, and you can have a lot of fun with that. So I'm going to let you go. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for sewing with me. I will be back on the first Saturday of every month for our Sew and Chat. It's always fun to spend time with my True Blue crew. Thanks for hanging out with me. Have a great day.